So for our load testing with IMR 3031 and a 30-06, we're going to start with once fired. This is Remington core lock brass. I had quite a bit that I've saved over the years. I always shot core locks. We'll be shooting this brass in the same gun that it was first fired in. I've already tumbled them, resized them. Now I'm just checking the length so that we have a consistent length, and all of these are relatively close. They were all the same brand. They were all fired out of the same gun. They're all ringing up around 2.490 to 2.492, which is under max length and just a little bit over trim length. For 30-06, they have a max case length of 2.494 and a trim length of 2.484. And so all of these are within that range. They're all relatively close. So I'm not going to trim them. I'll probably just run them through the Lyman Case Prep Express, get them cleaned up and ready to prime and load. Nice and clean. Well, call me old-fashioned, but now that we've got our brass all ready to prime and load, it's time to pick a load. And I still like getting out the load manuals. This one here is exclusively for 223, but you'll find just about every bullet manufacturer out there with different powders, different bullets, all in one load manual. I know you can get this on the internet, but a lot of what's on the internet ain't in these older books. This is a Nosler 5th edition. I looked in it for 30-06 load data for 150 grain bullets, and I didn't find anything that mentioned IMR 3031. In most of my newer loading manuals I didn't. But I found this old Lyman reloading handbook. This is the 46th edition here, and this was originally printed in 1982. Look at this. $9.95. A friend of mine gave me this, and he gave me a bunch of older reloading manuals, and they're great just for comparing loads to what you're seeing on the internet. One of the downsides to using just exclusively loading manuals is that the newer calibers and newer powders are not listed in them. So, like I have a 300 blackout. There's no load data in any of these older books for 300 blackout, 300 ACC. So anyways, in this particular load manual, here under the 150 grain jacketed soft points, I did find that IMR 3031 is a powder that has some load data for it. And this is where I found my initial load that I just shot a few times back in the end of winter just to see what it would do. And so I had a hard time finding load data on the internet for IMR 3031. It's an older powder, been around a lot. But here in this particular manual, in the Lyman Reloading Handbook, I found the data I was looking for. So we're going to write this on paper. We're going to develop maybe 3-4 different loads in between 42 and 52 grains, and we'll see what we come up with. Okay, call me old school, call me a Neanderthal, tell me I could do this online, tell me there's an app for that. I don't care. The same principle applies. If you're going to shoot some test rounds, you need to write down how they performed with each powder and with which bullet. So what we're going to do here is just basic stuff. I'm shooting these out of my Remington 700 30-06. The average case length is 2.490. This is once fired Remington brass. Then I have the powder, IMR 3031, and the bullet. It's 150 grain Serria soft point boat tail and then there's the number 2125. When I finish loading, I'll have the overall length to put right here. We're going to start low and work up. That way, if we see signs of pressure, we can stop and not shoot the hotter loads. So this gave us a starting load of 42 grains, which I know I don't want to shoot that low of a velocity. So we're going to start at 47.5. And we'll load 3 rounds at 47.5. 3 rounds at 48. We're just going to come up by half round increments. And the maximum pressure is supposed to be at 50.0 grains. So I want to stop just shy of max. I love this gun. I've had it. It was a graduation present from my parents. I don't want to shoot the barrel out. I don't want to do any damage. I don't want brass in my face. So these are going to be our 5 loads. So we'll need 15 rounds to complete this. So this is how I do it. I know there's an app. I know you can key all this into your phone, and that's cool. But either way, you got to do the same thing. And you can keep up with what primers you shoot and the relative humidity. But this ought to give us all we need to know. Okay, we have our load picked out. We have our brass ready to prime. You don't want to prime brass and leave it primed and unloaded. So we know we have 5 loads, and we're going to load 3 of each different powder charge. So that means I'm only going to need 15 rounds to complete what I have on paper. So just a little common sense here will save you a lot of headache. I only have 15 brass out because that's what it's going to take. I don't have extra brass in my load blocks here that I may or may not have put powder in. So I took all the extra brass and put them over here out of sight behind Mount Rushmore and the lacrosse koozie. And so all I'm going to be working with is these 15 because that's all I need to load. On top of that, since I know I'm only loading 15, I put exactly 15 primers in my primer tray. So I should have no primers left when all the brass is primed. These are just ways to keep you from making mistakes like putting powder in brass that doesn't have a primer in the bottom, so when you pick it up to put your bullet in it, all your powder runs out the primer pocket. These are just simple steps. If you'll do them and get used to doing them and counting out your primers, counting out your brass, ensuring that you have the bullets to load, because there's nothing worse than weighing out all the powder and you get ready and you only have 10 of those bullets in the container. So we know we've got bullets, we know we've got powder, we know what we're going to load. Now's when you want to prime them, because you want to load them shortly after you prime them. That ensures that you don't have no moisture can get in contact with your primers. There again, common sense. Don't look down it when you're priming it. And when you do prime it, I tend to run my finger over the top of the brass just to ensure that the primer is seated what I would call just under flush. By the way, we're using large rifle primers, number 200 by CCI. And I'm sure the other primers are just as good. That's just what was on sale when I bought large rifle primers, and I heard good reviews on it. I haven't had any trouble. So you could take all this brass away and store it, but what I'm going to do is set all the brass that I'm not reloading at the time at the back of the load blocks. And I'm going to put the 3 brass that will be loaded for this powder charge at the front, so that all I do is shift my funnel from brass to brass 3 times. Also, the only powder I have on my bench is what I'm reloading. That way I don't add more to the cup that I'm going to dip out of. I use these little Lee cups. This is 2.2 cc's. It's just what I'm used to. I don't think they're better than any other way. It's just my particular method. It's how I learned. I weigh each individual load exactly as we have planned. And then I took my very first load, which was 47.5 grains. I wrote that on a sheet of paper and I put it here on this little scratch pad. If I'm looking at this sheet of paper, I could glance up and look at 48.5, and then we would be 1 grain off, and that would affect our group. So I take that pad and I put it upside down on the bench so I don't see it. And then I just load, and anytime I'm wondering, right there in front of me is 47.5. So I'm going to dump powder in there. That's 27.4. Then we'll dump 39.9. That's 47.5 right there, which is what we're looking for. And then I know I'm going right to the one next to it. I'm doing this 3 times. Give it a chance to make sure it's going to settle on 47.5, and it is. One more time. I don't get in any hurry, especially when I'm trying to develop a load, because I want to be as precise as I possibly can. That way I know if it's just bad I don't want it to be bad reloading or lackadaisical powder measurement that caused my spread or my velocity changes. I want to be as close as I possibly can to what I've chosen to load. I don't even like talking about it while I do it, but we're going to do it on this first load because I'm pretty sure I'm not going to shoot 47.5. But at least I'll have some data for the lower end of the powder spectrum. Lower end of the powder spectrum. You won't find that on any other loading channel. At least I'll have some kind of guidelines for what the lower end of these this load will do. Okay. Here's the dies we'll be using. Now we have the 3 brass that we put powder in. We're going to set them in our load blocks, and all the empty brass are away from us. So if we were to load something that didn't have powder in it, we'd have to reach over the top of these 3 brass that we do have loaded. And to ensure that we don't accidentally do something wrong, we only have the exact amount of bullets on the table to match the brass that we have. So we're going to load 3 with 47.5 grains of IMR 3031. So we have 3 bullets out. I know you say, well, any idiot could do that. You'd be surprised. Your wife starts telling you dinner's ready and you're in a hurry and you forget something or do something wrong. These are just fail-safes to keep you from making mistakes on the range. And if you ensure that you're working good on the range, it'll keep you from making mistakes when you've got a big deer or something in front of you. Now we need to set up our die. And once we get our die set to the exact depth, then it's going to be just a matter of putting the exact powder charge in the brass, and we won't have to mess with the die since the bullets are the same in each load. So with the shell holder in the die, with the shell holder in the press, we're going to run it all the way to the top, and we're going to take our die down till we feel it hit the top of the shell holder. We're going to back it up 1 full turn. Then tighten down the lock nut. Okay, the die is in place. I'm going to make sure we have the bullet seating pin all the way, or not all the way up, but well out of the way. So we take 1 bullet, 1 brass. Oh, didn't hit anything. Okay, so basically all we've done is slide the bullet into the casing. Now we need to start monitoring the depth so we get our overall length that we want. So now we get the micrometer out and we'll start measuring that. I'll come back when I get it right. It's just a matter of going up into the die and then checking it, tightening it. You don't need to watch all that. We'll come back when we get it right. We have got the bullet seated in the brass at 3.316. It says that the maximum maximum overall length is 3.34, and we're a little under that. I checked my core locks that I was shooting, and they were like 3.1. So you're shooting a lead tip bullet, so it's going to vary a little bit. But the main thing is, before you load all of these, is to make sure that they will chamber in the rifle, not just fit in the barrel. We're not going to shoot it one at a time. So what we want to do is push it down in there. As you can see, this is a Remington 700 ADL. Doesn't have a belly pan, so it's loaded from the top. And we want to make sure that it goes in and bolts without any difficulty. And so that's exactly what we have. We want to make sure we haven't deformed the soft lead tip in doing that. We want to make sure there's no scratches on the brass where we've rammed it into the lands. And we don't see any of that. So we're going to go with an overall length of 3.13, I believe. 3.31, I'm sorry, 3.31. And we'll check this and make sure that's our average. Now that we've got the depth where we want it, let's back this off. Let's loosen this up. Okay. Now let's run this down. We start feeling a little pressure. What we're going to get here is a little bit of crimp on the brass. We don't need a lot, just a little bit. I'm starting to feel the brass because my cedar plug is all the way up, so I'm starting to feel the brass on my die. I just want to go a little bit past that. Very, very lightly crimped. It's not an automatic, it's not ramming it up in there. So we just want enough to keep the bullet in place. That feels pretty good there. So we're going to tighten up the lock ring so that it doesn't move. That's tightened up. Let's slide the cedar plug down just till we start to feel the bullet. That's it. Tighten the cedar plug. Let's run another one and see how we do. There's our first one. Let's see if this one comes out right. Very lightly crimped. .327. 3.319. So we're within 6 1/1000ths. Let's try our third one. .325. So with a lead tip bullet, that's pretty close. Each one of them varies just a little. There's our first 3 loads. Okay, you're going to need a good shell holder, one that's slotted where you can put everything in it. Some people write on them with a marker, but I find this works fine. Every time I open a shell box with the latch with the lid away from me, this is always slot number 1. So it's just like you read left to right. So as I made out my load chart earlier that we looked at, number 1 is 47.5, and that's just what we loaded, so that goes into slot number 1, and I load it from back to front. And then as I load my next load, which will be 48 grains of powder, I'll change my little scratch pad, and I'll make that 48, and I'll load it, and since it's number 2, it'll go in spot number 2. And we could actually load over 10 different loads in this box, and the very last one would be load 10. So typically what I'll do, since I'm loading all 31 powder here for these 5 loads will all be in order just as I wrote them out. Now I may skip a couple of spots since I have some extra brass and load up some other powder just as a comparison to see how it does velocity wise and accuracy wise. But when I go to the range, this piece of paper will be folded up in this box, and I can unfold it and I'll know what everything loaded is, and then when I shoot it, I'll write down my groups, or I might make a star by it, whichever one was better, and I'll write down my velocities on the same sheet of paper, fold it back up with the empty brass in order. That way when I get back, all this brass will be empty, and I can check by looking at the primer pockets and the primer, and I can check pressures and kind of see if I can get some indicators, maybe that my pressure's getting too high. And so anyways, that's the way I'll do it. I'll put this in there and we'll go to the range after I get these loaded. Now, it's 5:30 right now. And last time I looked at my phone, it was still 98 degrees. You figure in humidity, you're talking about 110 degrees. So I may not run out and shoot these anytime soon. It may be maybe 2 weeks before I go shoot these. Maybe 3 weeks. It'll just have to depend when I can get off on a nice cloudy day, or maybe get up early one morning and go to the range and shoot these. But that's basically the process for loading 5 different rounds with the same bullet, same powder, just varying the amount of powder till we find one that this particular bullet and this particular load works with. Thanks for watching.